think to yourself what you remember about the story of Pandora's box and what came out. Robert?
Killing.
Killing, yeah, people killing. That might have been something that came out of Pandora's box. Bill?
Drugs and alcohol.
Drugs and alcohol. Just one more. Christy?
There was hope came out of the box.
Hope came out of the box.
How is all that linked to this?
Blackpool has undergone some significant changes in recent times. It's had little investment over the years, and it has become an area which has considerable deprivation. And some of the wards in Blackpool are amongst the most deprived in the country. And it has very challenging circumstances for families and for learners.
We also have an issue with the aspirations of the youngsters. And I think that is probably our greatest challenge, raising the levels of their aspirations. So making them more successful learners, making them more aspirational in how they approach things, making them more independent, giving them the skills really to become the lifelong learners that we want to create.
The economic decline which has blighted Blackpool is a catalyst for some fundamental changes in educational policy.
Just find yourself a little bit of space and we're going to do some cross crawl, nice and slowly, matching my pace. You ready? January, February.
5 of the town's 8 schools are experimenting with new thinking as part of the wide-ranging changes being piloted by the QCA's Key Stage 3 curriculum review.
Well, if you think that the national curriculum was invented in the late 80s, and then try to remember what the late 80s were like, you realise how it was a curriculum for its time, and what we need now is a curriculum for our time. Our children today are very, very different people from even 20 years ago. The internet hadn't been invented in the late 80s. It's only 15 years old. It would be in year 10 at the moment. But somehow we've got to get our youngsters, these millennium children, to be able to engage with learning in a different way from when the national curriculum was invented. We've got a massive advance of technology in all sorts of ways. We've got people moving around the world in ways and at speeds different from ever before. We've got more knowledge now about how children learn. We understand the brain in a way that we never did before. Now we have to take all these things into account in order to engage with our youngsters in a way that helps them to learn. And the curriculum needs to move on and be appropriate to the time in which children live.
I thought we'd start with collegiate this morning, because I know you've been in recently, and we know that they're more advanced in what they're doing than a lot of the other schools. So
today, a local authority team is reviewing progress at one of the schools, Collegiate High.
They weren't necessarily low achievers, but they were displaying certain characteristics. They tended to be working at level 3 in English. They tended to have low, what was then known as SEBs, finding it difficult to make new friends, to cope with change and those areas. They were using displacement strategies when they couldn't cope. They were avoiding confronting the issues. So that's what Sarah has been working on. She's been trying to give them coping strategies.
At Collegiate High School, their Ulysses project is aimed at identifying vulnerable pupils and supporting them as they make the transition into Key Stage 3.
Some of the pupils adapt very quickly and very well to a traditional secondary curriculum where they have 13 or 14 teachers and 13 or 14 different subjects, and they quite enjoy that big change from primary to secondary. However, for an increasing number of pupils who've had a very different experience at primary school, it's difficult for them to see that immediate change and to see the separation of subjects. And I was also very aware that some children that came into Key Stage 3 just were not settling, and their behaviour was perhaps becoming an issue. And I didn't think that was because they were innately badly behaved, it was because we weren't giving them the right sort of curriculum to engage and excite them.
So what we're going to look closely at today is that idea of hope. And how can hope make better some of the things that are troubles in the world? They have a base room, which is the first big difference. So rather than what they would usually do, which is to go from room to room, from teacher to teacher in different subjects. They're actually largely, for a large part of the day, in a base room. Rather than have a large number of teachers throughout the day, they have a smaller team of teachers to get to know. And they spend varying amounts of their timetable with us. Because it's smaller, it allows us to go for individual need. So not everybody in here is the same, and not everybody spends exactly the same amount of time with us. So they have their own tutor groups, and they register with the tutor every morning. They do PE, and they do tech and languages and tutor studies, which is an hour with the tutor, with their tutor group. The rest of the time we do cross-curricular work in here with a real emphasis on literacy, key skills and thinking skills. Asa, good lad, independent. We're going to do just a little bit of independent work where we're going to really go into top gear thinking. Okay, so when we get to that, it's going to be top gear thinking. Am I looking for the same behaviour as group work when we do independent work? What are we looking for there? Robert?
Working by yourself and being sensible.
Working by yourself and being sensible, well done. Anything else that we're after when we're doing our independent work? Jordan? Quiet and calm, lovely. We know that emotions play a massive, massive part in how we actually learn things and how we can retain information. And so any good learning is always linked to positive emotions. And so if you engage pupils by making it fun and by making it enjoyable, then one, they're likely to be engaged and do your lesson, but secondly and importantly, they're likely to retain not just the content of your lesson, but the ideas behind it and the skills behind it as well. So it's very strongly linking positive emotions, making it a very safe place where they do feel that they can come in and enjoy themselves and achieve at the same time. So it's just attaching that to the learning. I'm going to squeeze some toothpaste out. But now I've changed my mind and I want it back in the tube. Can that happen? No. How's that like Pandora's box then with the troubles? Let's see, I'm looking for 6 people at least to have a think on that. How is squeezing minty toothpaste out of the tube like Pandora's box? Go on, Sophie.
Because when she let the troubles out of the box, she couldn't put them back in, and when you squirted the toothpaste out, you can't put it back in.
Absolutely. Think about the toothpaste. It was just squeezed out of the tube there. And I want you to think to some of the work we've done in SEBS, how are put-downs like the toothpaste when it's squeezed out of the tube?
Sarah is trying out some new approaches. One technique is called the brain break.
And it might be that sometimes you get stuck a little bit or you need to take a little bit of a break and do something different. If that happens, what am I looking for you to do? The brain break, again, it was based on this idea of how do we take on board new ways of thinking about how the brain works. And the way it works is quite simply, they have a card that they have on their table, and when they're not using it, it's face down. And when they decide that they need a brain break, they just turn it over and they do one of the brain break activities that they know they can use.
If you're like stuck and you just like want a break out of it, you just like get a card and just sit out for 5 minutes and read a book or doodle or something. Because some people like get wound up because they can't do it, they just go take it and it like calms them down.
With all of our case studies, we started off from a baseline. We've set out 3 particular objectives, and we decide on what the outcomes are going to be from those particular objectives. And then we work out what are the activities, what are the strategies, what are the resources, the structures that we have to put into process, into action, in order to enable those things to happen.
When I say go, I want you to go and collect as many words from other people as you can. So if somebody comes to you, you tell them the word on your square, And together you work out, how does that word act as hope for one of these troubles? So you need to decide which trouble does that word cure.
These ideas are some of the many included in the QCA's Key Stage 3 review. Why is such a huge rethink necessary?
It's that period after leaving primary schools where children have typically been with a few teachers for quite a long while. They come to a secondary school which is usually much bigger, much more complex, much more difficult to come to terms with. And there is a well-known hiccup effect that children's learning, which has been making good progress through primary, suddenly seems to slow down or in some cases go backwards for a period. And everybody in the communities, whether it be school teachers, parents, children themselves, and the government and QCA, knew that we needed to do something about it. So here we are, trying to do what we can and make a better deal for young people.
The brain gym helps me to calm down, because sometimes when you come in from break you're dead giddy and excited, but then that just like makes you calm down and think about your work.
There's not a lot of us, and so you can like talk to people when there's only a little amount of you. Because I don't like working in a big group. Like I end up being silly in a big group.
The evidence so far is in terms of their scores, their tests, they've no doubt come on leaps and bounds. For me, and I come in here quite often, it's a matter of coming in and there being smiles on their faces, them wanting to be here, them wanting to read to me. I'll come in and they'll say, "Miss, can I read to you?" Or "Miss, can you do?" Or "Miss, have you got?" And that's immediate relationship, and it's, to be honest, it's enough confirmation for me that they want to be here and enjoying their lesson.
They've learnt you more about how to do those lessons and how to calm down and stuff and not get angry and not to give up on your work. Because I used to get really annoyed and give up when the computers went all wrong and when I got my work wrong, but now I just like stop and think and then carry on.
In some respects, they're quite small steps, and in other respects, the progress is absolutely huge. And I think sometimes the problem is it's not always the things that you can show on a piece of paper as data or percentages or levels, but it's in your actual watching of your pupils interact and get on with work. So, for example, for me, important things are, I don't often now hear the word can't.
There will be a universal core to this curriculum. All children, whether they're in Berwick or Bodmin, Bedford, Birmingham or Billericay, they'll have the opportunity to learn the same things, and people can feel confident that every child in the country has an entitlement. But beyond that, there will be different levels of uniqueness. What we're really after is a curriculum which is well thought through, carefully designed and really focused on the needs of the children that we're teaching in a particular school.